Good morning and welcome to Thomas College. My name is Kim Linloff. I'm the President and CEO of the Mid-Maine Chamber and a proud Thomas alum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today. Before we begin our program, I want to take a moment to thank our 2020 Business Breakfast Series sponsors. They include AT&T, Cross Insurance, New Dimensions Federal Credit Union, Nicholson Michaud and Company, CPAs, O'Donnell, Lee, McCowan, and Phillips, attorneys at law, Sheridan Construction. Our print media sponsor is the Morning Sentinel. Our radio sponsor is 107.9 The Mix. And our video sponsor is Kennebec Savings Bank. Thank you for your support. I would ask you now to please take a moment to turn off your cell phones in consideration of our speaker and TV audience. I also want to welcome our newest chamber members this morning that were voted in December, Industrial Energy Consumers Group and One Bridge Consulting. Today we had three spotlighters out back, Bricks Co-working Space, and we're doing a drawing for 5 20-day passes to that co-working space in Hathaway. Thank you, RJ. The Harold Alfond Institute for Business Innovation is over here with Ed. Free registration to a 2020 professional development program, which is a course valued at anywhere between $112 and $225, so someone's going to walk away with that. The Robin's Nest, which is a cute little florist in Hathaway. Robin is back there. She is giving away that beautiful bouquet that Cindy is holding. She does gorgeous work. We highly recommend her. And then we have a $30 gift certificate to Sella Tea that it donated for a door prize today. I want to take a moment to thank both Eric's Restaurant and Aroma Joe's for providing the meal today. Thomas is currently closed. Students will be in next week. Is that true? But the food service wasn't open, so I want to thank both of you very much. The coffee was wonderful. The quiche was wonderful. Thank you. Tonight, the Central Maine Growth Council will hold Central Maine Tech Night in conjunction with Bricks Co-working Space and the Harold Alfond Institute for Business Innovation, sponsored by the Business Innovation Institute and CGI and Valley Beverage. The founder of UpBed, Aaron Smale, will discuss his startup story and plans for his wearable technology to detect bed exits for Alzheimer's and dementia patients. So it's really a cool product. This is tonight at Bricks in Hathaway from 5 to 6:30. We'll have free beverages and pizza. On January 15th, we are offering a business after hours at 5:30 at Standard Waterproofing at its new location on the Augusta Road in Winslow. That's sponsored by Northern Light Inland Hospital, Kennebec Savings Bank, and Valley Beverage. Our next Meet the Reps event will be held on February 5th from 5:30 to 7 in partnership with KV Connect, our regional young professionals group, and that's going to be held at the Bill and Joan Alfond Main Street Commons Chase Community Forum Room in downtown Waterville. Our next business breakfast right here in this room is entitled Waterville Reignited and will be held on February 6th. Our speaker, Colby's Director of Commercial Real Estate, Paul Urenick, is going to outline plans for renewing downtown Waterville's economic vitality. And I want to note that he's not just going to speak to Colby projects, he's going to speak to all the different activities that are happening in the downtown area. Today, our speaker is Commissioner Heather Johnson from the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development. She will be discussing Maine's strategic plan to move the state forward to create a sustainable economy for all. I'm going to ask that if you have questions for Commissioner Johnson, that you please hold them to the end, and Cindy will come around with a mic so that you speak into the mic so our TV audience can hear the questions. And at this time, I'm going to introduce my friend and colleague, Mike Duguay, who is the Executive Director of the Harold Alfond Institute for Business Innovation here at Thomas. Mike?
Thank you, Kim, and good morning, everybody here to Thomas College. It's my distinct pleasure to be able to introduce our speaker, Commissioner Heather Johnson. Heather Johnson grew up in Skowhegan, Maine, and graduated from the University of Maine. She began her career by building a diverse background in the private technology sector, including sales, operations, and general management, with roles at Nokia, Gateway, and Toshiba. With continually expanding roles in her career, she created startup operations inside large companies, developed new products for sales and new markets, and ran a $1.2 billion retail business. After leaving the private sector, Heather had the opportunity to concentrate on economic development back in her hometown in Skowhegan for the Somerset Economic Development Corporation. During her time there as the executive director, she focused on key economic activities such as connectivity, workforce, participation, and potential growth markets. While serving as the director of Connect Maine, or Connect Me, Heather was responsible for managing a small grant portfolio, mapping key assets, working with communities and businesses to help them identify needs and opportunities to use that connectivity to enable their goals and growth strategies. Heather was able to make changes to position Connect Me to move forward into the connectivity space. As Commissioner of the Department of Economic and Community Development, Heather continues to dedicate her time and career to fostering economic development, both in private companies and in rural communities across Maine. As a lifelong colleague in economic development, I'm delighted to be able to introduce Heather to you and the hard work that she and her staff have been enduring this past year. And I know that she's been out there on the road really talking about the strategic plan of the governor as well as her office. So I'm really excited to be part of that and also to have Heather here today. Thank you. Heather.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you. Okay, good morning. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Kim, for the invitation, and Lori for hosting. You know, we're excited to be here. Sorry, does that seem really loud to you guys? Can you turn that down just a little bit? Thanks. So we're going to spend a little bit of time this morning talking about the new state strategic plan. A little bit of background on the plan is when I started talking about this role with then Governor-elect Mills, I looked around for the state's economic plan, right? You want to be prepared and you want to know kind of where we're going and what's working and what's not working. And it became clear that there wasn't one. And so then we started looking back, and there were lots of reports and individual kind of specific things, but no comprehensive look at how do we move forward as a state, how do we create a platform or a roadmap? If you think about groups like local chambers and the Growth Council and other organizations like that, and then the private sector, if there's no way for us all to work together, it's really hard to leverage each other's investments and each other's work and to connect programs together. We're seeing great work across the state, but a lot of times it's not connected to other good work that's going on that really could be supportive. And we're seeing some capacity gaps in very similar places. So as you start to think about that and put those pieces together, it becomes clear there are some things that we can do to be helpful. What I will say about this plan is it's a couple of things. I think it's a good roadmap for us all to work from. It is in some cases very aspirational. So, you know, I think as you look at the projects that sit in this plan, you know, some of them you'll really like, some of them you probably won't, and that's okay. You know, as we've been out talking to people, there are different needs in different parts of the states, and so some of it you'll hopefully see reflecting your own goals, and some of it maybe won't resonate as well with you. I think what it isn't is magic. You know, I think one of the things we have to be careful about is because there hasn't been a plan, for a few months everybody's like, well, it'll get solved by the economic plan. And the economic plan is good. I feel really confident in it. But it's not going to solve all of our problems, right? We're going to still have to do a lot of work to get to where we need to be. It's also not incredibly prescriptive, so that communities and local organizations can take the pieces that they see themselves in and execute on those. And it's not intended to be everybody does one thing and we all do the same thing. So with that, I'll give you just a little bit, pretty standard business process flow there. We spent, I don't know, 9-ish months over the last year working on developing the plan. Bruce Wagner, who is the president and CEO of the Finance Authority of Maine, was our chief architect. We thought Bruce was as nonpartisan as we could get, as you can find, right, in the marketplace. Everybody, I don't know anybody that doesn't love Bruce Wagner to start with. He's done this both in the public sector and the private sector, so he has a lot of experience kind of taking in a lot of data, taking in a lot of inputs, working with teams to synthesize those inputs and come to an output. He is also very good at driving a process so that things don't get off track. We didn't lose time anywhere, and we delivered kind of on the day and time we were intended to. So Bruce was a key architect for the work. Over 1,300 Maine people over the course even of the summer came in and participated with a lot of input. And I don't know if you've heard Bruce kind of talk about the plan yet or not, but we got, right, as we got started, it became clear that we needed more and more resources without wanting to spend any additional money on the plan. And so we started making calls to people. People from the private sector jumped in with people resources, data resources. Bruce likes to refer to it as no call went unanswered. And he never got all the way through his pitch, and neither did I, before people said, well, what can we do to help? Even this morning, Chuck and I were talking, and he said, well, how can we help? And so, that's one of the great things about Maine. I think if you go to other states, you don't have that same level of engagement and of people really having the best interest of the state at heart. So what you'll see is a lot of people, a lot of input. Sometimes the input could be synthesized into the plan, and sometimes it's really good information. It's not a bad idea. It just, doesn't fit in the scope of the work that we're doing. So the vision is really to make Maine have a sustainable and diverse economy. Sustainable in that it's across the state and not in a couple of pockets. Sustainable in that it's not in one industry, but that there is a span of work there. And diverse in its nature. What we see a lot of, and we'll talk a little bit about this, are kind of how supply chains work throughout the state. And I don't know that that had been traditionally mapped particularly in a lot of detail, and we've done some of that work to be helpful about, if you make an investment here, how does the rest of the state benefit, and how can we incent businesses to help with that process? So the strategic goals, grow, I like to do these in the other order, but grow the value-added contribution per job by 10%. With that should come wage growth, right? As you grow productivity, wage growth generally comes with that. The Fed's got a lot of data that shows how those things are interconnected, as they should be. There's some data that shows when and how they disconnect, so we've got some information there. And then we need to get 75,000 additional people into the state's workforce. To give you perspective, the workforce over the past 10 years is flat. Our workforce numbers have been flat. If you think about the aging population, we have about 65,000 people over the course of the next 10 years that will retire. And if you think about our current situation, our GDP is compressed because of our worker shortage. If you think about 2.8% unemployment, that's below any economist's ideal world. So the GDP is compressed as a result of that. So we could use additional people today, and we know 65,000 people will likely age out, or at least partially age out of the workforce over the next 10 years. So 75,000 people, it's an incredibly ambitious goal. We'll talk a little bit about that and how we get there. So some key themes really emerged. And as we think about this plan, some of these themes are important about how we execute. So really, talent is the driver of all good economies. If you go do a bunch of research, which I'm kind of a data geek, so that's what I did, and you look at good, thriving economies, and you really drill to the bottom of it, it's all about talent. Talent will pull almost everything else, particularly right now, right? We talk about our workforce challenges, but anywhere in our country, there are workforce challenges, right? We have worker shortages across the country, so that's not specific to Maine. Therefore, good talent and quality talent will drive business attraction and business growth. Talent and workforce are a little bit different. Workforce is about volume. Talent sometimes can have very specific kind of cycles around attraction, so that's why we talk about them separately. Business climate being stable. We're seeing some regulatory gaps. What we heard from businesses across the state was, don't change the bar, right? Keep the bar really high. That's good. It adds value to our products. As an example, I don't know that anybody in this applies to anybody in this room, but just as a good example, if you sell Maine salmon in a grocery store, it's worth $2 more a pound than if you sell salmon from someplace else. That's because Maine has this perception of clean water and high quality fishing traditions, right? And so People want Maine fish. We have lots of other products that can fall into that type of value equation. So that's one work stream that's actually got to happen around domestic exports and how do we increase our exports from Maine. But if we change our regulatory structure, we've got to make sure that we protect that. So clean water, clean air, all of that, no business said to us, lower the standard. What they said to us is make the process easier, make the process transparent, right? If you order a $2 product from Amazon, you know where it is every single step of the way and when it's going to land on your door, and it's probably going to land on your door in 3 days. We can't do 3 days, but what we should be able to do is a really transparent process that parallel paths multiple work streams so that all the bars can be hit. No project that we've seen, as we were talking to businesses, no viable project has had any issues with the bar. The issues have all been with process. So DEP is lined up to that and trying to figure out how to be helpful. The Secretary of State's office, the Department of Environmental Protection, and the Department of Marine Resources are all partnering with us on some solutions for businesses. Again, some of those will be band-aided solutions until we can really fix some of the underpinning pieces. But for businesses, the front end of that should be a little bit different. You should know when your permit's going to be, cleared. You should be able to know where it is in the process and what the questions are about it as it goes through the process instead of waiting, right? It goes in, the state does their thing, it comes out the other end with more questions. Those questions can happen along the way, and they shouldn't have to be one after the other. They should be able to parallel path. So that sounds obvious, right? But to get all of those departments to agree to that, and then agree to looking at business processes to fix that, because it's really a business process challenge. We use technology in the end to streamline that work, but first we've got to fix the business processes. So that's kind of step one for us. For now, we're going to Band-Aid that and put a little bit of a priority team together to be able to move and understand where those process breakdowns are happening. So much of the work right now is paper. I was shocked, frankly, at, okay, you have to fax this application in. I don't even have a fax machine, but so, and businesses don't either, right? So there's a lot of business process work to be done there. Innovation is key. If you're thinking about value-added productivity, one of the most effective ways to get that is by being more efficient. Wick Johnson at Kennebec Technologies talks a lot about how they're changing their process flows to get more out of the same shift, right? As we have worker shortages and we'll continue to have worker shortages, thinking about how do we optimize the way we do work. So R&D falls under that. And there's a whole section in the plan to look at R&D, because as we think about Maine, right, Maine is incredibly well positioned to be a global climate solutions leader. We have all of the assets that takes, right? We have this great working forest. Our working forest is the best carbon sink in the country because working forests sequester more carbon than stagnant forests do. So the better and more efficient and sustainable we can keep that forest working for us, the better off we are. And if you think about what can come out of that from the end of that equation, there's a ton of research going on at the university. We can make all of these out of wood fiber, out of wood cellulose, basically. And so we've got to start thinking differently about single-use plastics. That's good for us, right? You think differently about single-use plastics as a climate change challenge. That also creates an economic opportunity for us in our state that other states don't have, right? Because we can be a source for that out of our wood products. And if you think about that, what that does, if you extract the nanocellulose, you can still use the rest of the log for other things. So it's not hurting any of our existing infrastructure, it's actually helping them, because the more value you can put per log, the more likely we are to get people to pull logs out of the woods, right? And in a sustainable, effective way. And so as that works, you're strengthening your supply chain for your existing businesses, and you're creating innovation and diversification of some of these heritage industries, right, that are just at our heart. I have a friend that owns a logging business, and he has a young son, and his older son now, is a teenager now. But when he was young, the discussion was, well, you're going to have to figure out what else you want to do, because you probably aren't going to be able to support your family logging. Now, right, we're desperate for loggers. The value of logs are going up a little bit, and we need more loggers. And so now we're trying to get this student to think differently about it. Well, he's now over here. Let's go back and take over this family logging business. But that's what it creates, right? It creates a pathway for lots of other opportunities. And this is where you get into these supply chains. And it's not just forest products. You can see it in marine. And marine, we'll talk about that maybe a little bit as well. But so if you think about an investment, an R&D investment at the university creating wood-based bottles. So a company in southern Maine, western Maine, right, that uses the bottle. So if you think Poland Spring has a partner that's going to make wood-based bottles somewhere in the state. The logs are going to come from somewhere else in the state. The packaging work will come from somewhere else in the state, right? And so if you can think about these logical logistical corridors and help people as they move product throughout our state, we can spread out the workforce demand, which is really important so that they can be at optimum productivity. We can also spread out the tax base and the support of that investment, and that's something really critical. And we've heard businesses, and we've talked to a lot of businesses about that, and they're really interested in that, right? They need us to do some things to incent them to do that, frankly, but that works for all of us and it helps support rural economies in a different way, and it helps spread out some of our challenges and offset for them. If you think about growing protein, so the global demand for protein is dramatically increasing. We are at the doorstep of the consumable market for the US. If you think we are a 1 day's drive from Boston, New York, DC, and 1.5 from Chicago, I mean, we are at the heart of a huge consumable market. And so if this demand for protein is growing, what can we do about that, right? Where is our opportunity there? We have a huge history in farming and fishing. We have strong, solid, traceable food systems, which are sustainable, and that's something that is of more and more interest to people today. We import about 95% of salmon into the US from Europe and from South America. We have the opportunity to grow those salmon here. We can add value to the salmon before they leave, so you'd probably grow them on the coast, right? We've got a couple of big projects in process now. You can do the value-added production work inland, because, right, that way you start to build these little hubs of excellence, right? Growing fish, understanding veterinary sciences, life sciences for that, move them into different markets that are on logical transportation corridors where you can be really good at producing the fish, right? What do you need to do to the fish after it's grown to make it be market ready? And then how do you get it out of the state quickly and effectively? So there are real opportunities in some of these heritage industries to think about what's next. It strengthens the supply chain, strengthens the existing work that's already going on. So for existing businesses, it makes their business more viable and stronger, but it also creates new opportunity. And it's interesting because what we're seeing is a lot of people coming out of these heritage industries are the ones that know best how to innovate in them, right? They understand the pieces of those industries much more effectively than others might, and so they are coming up with really creative, unique ideas. I was at Greenlight Maine last night, and they're doing a student edition of Greenlight Maine, and I can't preempt the show, but there was a student there who had come from a lobstering family and just has this fascinating product, so watch Greenlight Maine, but has this really fascinating product, and it's something I'd never thought of, right? And clearly nobody else had because it's not on the market yet, but because she'd grown up kind of in that world, but is thinking kind of about her future, it was this interesting kind of leverage point. And so now the question is, okay, right, once the Greenlight Maine show is over, how do we help her get access to the resources she would need in order to base that company in Maine and then scale it effectively? So our young talent is taking that on. I think people in these heritage industries are seeing these opportunities and are really excited. So I'm guessing people in this room are really tired of hearing me talk about connectivity, so I won't spend a ton of time on it. Broadband, broadband, broadband. We need to be connected. People need to be connected, have access. As we talked, these students we talked to last night, they can't put their business in a market that doesn't have broadband access. And even to ask them if they would land in a place that didn't have broadband, they were like, no. And we've shifted the dialogue a little bit to ubiquitous connectivity because fixed line broadband is good and needed, but the reality is people use technology. If you go to other markets, people are using technology very interchangeably and don't know how they're even connected necessarily and don't care. When I left New York the first time to move back, I mean, you would be able to be seamless from your house to your office, through your car, through the grocery store, and that would have been, I don't know, 9 years ago. We don't have those expectations here because it hasn't happened here before. But that's how, if we're going to start attracting people to Maine and start expecting businesses to be able to grow across our state, they've got to be able to be connected. It's a global market. And it's not just about the economy. It's about a lifestyle, right? Students in these markets don't get foreign languages until they're in high school. It's too late, right? They've lost the window of how easy it is to pick up a foreign language when you're young. You can do all of that online. We were talking to the Snow Pond people yesterday, and they were talking about doing distance learning voice lessons. So, for all of these reasons, right, for people to be able to age in home, the person you were referencing, Kim, with the MedWatch stuff that you're going to talk about tonight, all of that requires some level of connectivity. So that's an important one. Sorry, I said I wasn't going to talk about it. I don't have it in me. And then modern infrastructure. And if you think about modern infrastructure, right, that's really about roads, it's about housing, it's about childcare, all of the things that enable people to effectively work and go to work. Most economic plans, if you look across the country and you pull some of the better ones, they don't necessarily spend a lot of time talking about early education or childcare or even transportation or housing. The reality is we need to, because we have very different opportunities to think about. So this is where the plan really looks at kind of local communities. So the housing challenges are different across the state. If you go to Portland, right, they've got a particular set of housing challenges. If you go to Madison, you've got a different set of housing challenges. There are ways to fix both, and there are opportunities in both of those areas. One of the things I will say is, as a state, we're going to try to look at some of these projects as we think about projects going into markets and really try to be focused on workforce housing, workforce transportation, because we can't solve everything. But when we know there are going to be 60 new jobs in Madison, we need to make sure, right, that there's some kind of infrastructure there to support that, at least initially, and in partnership with the community and the business. So a lot of work to be done there. I would say that is very location-based. It's also very talent-based, because as you talk to people, we did a bunch of student focus groups, or you spend more time doing this than I do, certainly, but the students have a very different perception of what housing looks like than maybe I do, or some of us would, right? There are young talent now is very mobile, and maybe doesn't see housing as a great investment anymore, or at least not an investment they're interested in at this stage of their life. And we see different things at different stages, right, of this workforce life, but we need to have flexible housing that allows us to go attract the people that we need. And it's, again, different by area. Density is different by area, and we need to be thoughtful about that as well. And there are a number of solutions, and you'll see some pilots, right, start over the next few years as we try to figure out how we're helpful, and that will really be driven at the community level. The state will be a support engine, but that work will happen at the community level because it's really about what the community sees as their need. Ooh. All right. So this is my favorite chart, just in case anybody's bored. So as you start thinking about where our opportunities lie, we brought in a bunch of economists, so we put a bunch of really smart people in a room, and they came out with a really smart answer that nobody could do anything with. But they were right. So then we had to start to think about, okay, well, how do we take all of this information and really leverage it? And it became clear that there were some themes and some trends that give us enough flexibility to think about this plan as a long-term plan, right? Because to think that we know what's going to be successful in 10 years is incredibly naive, right? And we don't think that. But what we think is we've got to have a roadmap that keeps us moving forward and allows us for enough flexibility to change as opportunity exists and as we have successes and or failures. So this really looks at where global market trends are going and overlays our assets onto those global market trends to say it's likely we have opportunities here. So Jack, we keep using the Go Lab example, right? They are this really interesting example. For anybody who doesn't know, Go Lab is a company that has recently bought the Madison mill and is looking at making wood fiber insulation. So if you think about the number of kind of boxes that checks for us as a state, right? It's a heritage industry. It strengthens the supply chain that we have in our forest products world. It's a strong rural community that has a great workforce that knows a lot about forest products. And it's a product that is part of the global climate solutions. So all of that kind of fits right into this web of this, and that's why we tend to use it a lot. What happens too is they need access to this large consumer market that we're at the doorstep of. So all of those pieces fit together to make that be kind of one of these really great solutions. Atlantic Sea Farms is another example. They are growing, for anybody who doesn't know them, they are, I don't know where they're based, Biddeford? I was just there, somewhere, southern Maine. And they grow kelp. So what they do is they've created a partnership with a number of lobstermen, because lobstering is a seasonal business, right? And if you're a lobsterman, you might be looking to generate more income in your off season. Luckily, kelp grows in a lobster off season, lobster fishing off season. And so at Atlantic Sea Farms, this came from, again, Bree Warner, who grew up in this space, right? Because they used to try to grow kelp on a farm, on a kelp farm, which is fine. That's one way to do it. But their productivity went up threefold when they started working with lobstermen. And Bree said, well, geez, this can grow in off seasons. Why wouldn't we leverage the investment lobstermen have already made in boats and lines and tackle and all of that? So basically, Atlantic Sea Farm grows the seed, lobstermen grow the kelp, they harvest the kelp, and then Atlantic Sea Farm adds value to that and sells it. So Atlantic Sea Farms really does the sales and marketing piece, a little bit of the value add piece. Lobstermen do what they're really good at. It creates an off-cycle product for them, which strengthens that heritage industry. So as you can see, these are some of the really great things that are going on in the state already. It's just thinking about how do we continue to work on some of these projects, how do we use that as a good framework for other opportunities, how do we showcase those? Because a lot of people don't know some of the good work, and then people don't know how to leverage that good work right into other things. And so if you start to see these frameworks work, it becomes much easier not to have to reinvent things. It's like, oh geez, okay, that makes sense. We could do some of this. So while that's a really complicated chart, I do think it helps us get to this thematic approach around where are our strengths, and our strengths are different by area, and how do we leverage kind of all of our strengths in the full supply chain and make sure we are intentionally and deliberately expanding that supply chain to include other communities. Oh, here's my supply chain chart. Okay, so this just tries to lay that out a little bit differently. So if you think about, you need somebody to take the tree out of the woods, somebody's got to drive it, you got to have saw it, you got to have the R&D work, and then there are all kinds of things that you can do. If you do the things on what would be your right, you can attract more loggers, right? If we don't do the things on the right, we're going to have trouble attracting loggers. And so it's a very connected and vertically integrated system as it works. And if you think about where all of this happens, it's pretty easy to spread that around the state, spread that tax base around the state. But it starts here, right? So there are some very functional things. Do we have enough loggers? No. If you go anywhere in the state to anybody that's using wood now, they'll say, we have plenty of wood, we don't have enough people to get it out of the woods. So there's opportunity there. And if you talk to loggers, we're talking to a student who just came out of the community college training, master logger training program, and he said, I've got the training, he said, but there's no way for me to get capital to buy one of these machines, because the equipment is incredibly expensive and complicated, frankly. So there are some things we can do there, right, to make that a little bit easier, to help people think about, if you don't have any credit history, if you don't have an existing business, maybe you don't have friends that have an existing business, how might you do that? How might you get access to that capital? What we're seeing is that there are some really underrepresented populations struggling to get access to capital. There's a lot of capital, but some of the young people, particularly from our poorer communities, having trouble getting access to capital. African Americans having trouble getting access to capital. New Mainers having trouble getting access to capital. And so I think there are some creative things that we can do in partnership with some of the with FAME and CEI to think differently about how do we start to create that. These would be people that aren't bankable. There's not a competition with banks. If they can get to a bank, that's always the first preference. But we also want to help incent people to get out and doing this work. So that's the workforce chart. Just to give you a sense of that. So this is the baby boomers. This is baby boomers and women entering the workforce. You got a little group there. And then as you can see, we've been stagnant. So to think about attracting 75,000 people to the workforce, you've got to look at this multiple ways. We've got to grow our own talent. We have a lot of opportunity to change the discussion we have with our students. So our workforce is really a continuum. And if you talk to students, they will tell you, somebody's told them, and they either have to do a 4-year degree, or as we talk to students, what they told us, let me rephrase that, what they told us is, 4-year degree, trade school, there aren't really any other choices. The reality is there are a lot of choices for kids. There are a lot of choices for adult learners that want to make changes, a lot of choices for people who are mid-career, right, that maybe want to think about a different career. Wasn't ever my career plan to be the commissioner. Right, I had to make a shift and adjustment, and I think probably a lot of you didn't necessarily have your eye on the specific place that you are today. And there are things that we can do. So we're going to launch a program called Maine Career Exploration that will start very early with students in kindergarten and start teaching them workforce skills in kindergarten. If you go into some of our poor rural school systems, a really high percentage of kids will tell you they're not going to graduate from high school because there's no reason for them to. They can't see themselves reflected in our economy, and that's heartbreaking. We can't lose kids at 8, right? They can't feel like there's no spot for them already. So we're going to start earlier than that. That doesn't mean we won't lose kids. We probably will. But the reality is there is a place for them in our economy, and we need them. So it's it's on us to kind of start early. And early means some easy things potentially, right? To talk to kids in a different way about work and what work looks like. So every kindergarten in our state greets kids as they come in, right? You have to kind of check them in. It's a security thing. That makes sense. If you made that kid shake your hand and look you in the eye and say good morning, by the end of their kindergarten year, they would know how to do that. Try to teach a 15-year-old how to do that. It's like beating your head on the wall. But you can teach 5-year-olds. 5-year-olds love that, right? They'll do it all day. And by the end, they'll be good, and then they'll know how to do it, and it will be an instinct. There were things like that. That doesn't cost any money at all, right? That's free. We already have those people. They're just not doing that work. So there are things like that, age-appropriate things that we can do all the way up through, including when they get into late high school years and the year after high school, potentially, internships and apprenticeships, right? As we talked to students, they said, we didn't know. We didn't know what was out there. We couldn't see it. I saw Craig earlier, some of the work JMG is doing, some of the work Junior Achievement's doing. If you look at the number of people in Junior Achievement that follow the career path of their mentor, it's incredibly high because that's what they know, right? They saw somebody that they respected that was doing that work. They understood easily what the path to that work was, and they could do it. JMD's put together some really interesting career path work for students so that they can see how these things can play out. Do this, then you do this, then you do this, and here's where you end up. And again, that doesn't mean that's where they're going to end up forever, but it's a place. I remember graduating from high school. My parents were both public school teachers, and I thought, I'm probably not going to be a public school teacher. I probably don't have the personality for that. And I didn't want to be in school anymore, but I didn't have any other idea what I would do. Now, I was fortunate, right? I had a structure that said you're going to go do something, and so kind of things just played out for me. But if you don't have that, and you don't have any vision to what the economy looks like and where your spot is, it's really challenging, I think, for some of our students, right? It used to be, you went to school and you went to the mill, right? And so you didn't have to think much about it, right? It was a really linear path. Some people thought, well, geez, I don't want to work at the mill, and then they had to figure it out. But we had a bulk of our economy that was built on a very traditional path that you didn't have to think a lot about. We don't have that anymore. That's not what the economy looks like anymore, and it's not going to. So now we've got to think about, okay, how do we help students figure that path out? And for adults, how do we help them figure out, what their optimal world for them is? We have 100,000 people in our state that are of working age but not part of the labor pool. So when you think about attracting 75,000 people to the workforce, we have a, okay. Oh, geez, now Kim's making me add. We've got a set of folks that are here that aren't part of the labor pool. Some of them are stay-at-home parents. Some of them are intentionally home for some very specific reasons. But there's real opportunity to create a bridge from people who aren't currently in the labor pool, that are disenfranchised for a variety of reasons, and our employers, right? Employers need that help. People that aren't part of the labor pool are generally looking for better opportunities, and so how do we create that bridge? And then kind of the third piece of that is really, how do we go out and attract people to Maine? We're seeing, hopefully some of you have seen, we ran an early campaign at the end of last year talking about boomerangs, right? Because the easiest people to attract to Maine are people who are from here. A lot of kids kind of will go and do, and then maybe when they're ready, come back. And so we need to be encouraging and welcoming about that. We were at the airport the day before Christmas, I think, is that right? 2 days before Christmas. And I can't tell you how many people came up to me and said, we need people, you want us to come back? And they were confused. And so some of this is just a cultural shift of, yes, we want you to come back. Yes, we need more people. Yes, we're going to welcome you. And yes, we have great economic opportunities for you to pick from. The other thing we need to tell people is Maine small business rate, survival rate, is the highest of anywhere in New England. So if you're going to start a business, start it here, right? We have a ton of resources. We don't necessarily tell you what they are, but we have a ton of resources. We're going to start telling you what they are. And so, you'll see a whole marketing campaign that is a little bit of an umbrella campaign to try to start attracting people. And as part of the plan, there are 2 or 3 tools that businesses have asked for, because we've heard very loud and clear from businesses that they're going to spend way more time and money attracting workforce than we ever will, which is absolutely true and perfect. It's the way that should work. But there are a couple of tools that we can simplify and create that you all collectively can use to market. And so we'll do that. And I think I can't add very well, but I think it's time for questions. Any questions? Yeah.
There's a piece on childcare.
Yeah.
In the strategic plan. Sorry.
That's okay. I'll repeat it.
What's the plan? How are we addressing that as a state?
So the question is, there's a piece on childcare in the plan, and then how are we addressing it? I think what we've seen is that there's a real challenge at getting quality and affordable childcare in all of our markets. And that is another one of those things that is different by community. If you go to certain areas, they'll say, we're fine. Some areas will say, we have toddler challenges, but once they're a little bit older, we're fine. Other places where kind of that aftercare, kids go to school, but after they get out of school, business people don't leave at 2:15, so what do you do from 2:15 to 5:30? So there's a lot to look at. How do we educate more early childhood folks? How do we partner? We have a number of good systems already. The EduCare program, right, is a really high quality early education opportunity. So I think the question is, how do we start to figure out what that network of childcare providers are? And what is it that will be helpful to get them to start? So do you want to talk a little bit about the program going on here? I don't know, is that confidential?
Yeah, no, it's not confidential. CEI got a federal grant not long ago. It's a childcare project, which they're naming Childcare Business Lab. So it's a sort of incubator for childcare, training childcare people to launch childcare businesses. Childcare Professional Development Organization, and they're busy creating its curriculum that'll help these new childcare entrepreneurs get off to a strong start. They're integrating small business startup and business planning with childcare management content. The plan is to offer the in-person sessions here in Waterville, so we are going to be the state headquarters for this childcare training. They'll vary the locations around Waterville a bit, but most of it will be at the Mid-Maine Chamber Central Maine Growth Council headquarters, which is also the location of MTI and the Small Business Development Center
Right.
counselor. So it'll be right there. They're going to start in February, March, April, May, and June. But it's a 3-year program, so it's going to continue on. So yeah, we're really, really, really fired up about it.
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing kind of statewide is that there is a natural network, right? Some parents want their kids to go to more of a school-type based setting. Some kids want more home, kind of less institutional type settings. And so, you know, I think from our perspective, we want to incent that broad network to be stronger and larger and more affordable. And we're looking at the choices. Yeah, Tracy?
Yeah, and I'm Tracy Fortin. I'm the Executive Director for Educare Central Maine here in Waterville and also a part of KVCAP. And we supported CEI in the writing of that grant and the ideas behind it. And Central Maine, you know, here in Waterville, there are such great resources and understanding of early care and education and how that is a workforce development need and issue. And to echo what you were saying, Heather, around the community, you need transportation, you need childcare. The state's looking at quality, accessibility, and affordability.
Yep.
And in the rural counties of Maine, it's family childcare. You know, it's not building centers, but it's family childcare and working with the providers who are in the area. So that's part of Educare's role. Yes, we're a great center, 200 kids, but Educare is a learning lab, learning hub and lab school with Thomas College. And the learning hub, it's what are the tenets of quality that can help the other communities throughout Maine.
And occasionally I'll get somebody that says, well, why do you care about childcare? Your economic development, just incent businesses to do their thing. And so, right, everybody, there are multiple ways to get to the same end. But we get calls. We just got a call, 2 weeks ago from a company in Aroostook County who was having to close for 3 weeks. They were closing their operations for 3 weeks because a local childcare had closed, and it affected their employees so much that they couldn't operate. So, right, I get that the economic development people aren't the ones driving childcare, but childcare drives economic development, and so we need to be supportive. And these pieces are all so intertwined that it's really hard to say, well, geez, that's not important or that's not important. You just go do this. One of the advantages we have right now is that we can all kind of create collaborative effort to create strength for a variety of work streams. Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
As we look at this 65,000 person deficit,
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about working with justice involved, generational poverty, and then new Mainers?
Yeah, so yes to all of them. You know, and the other thing we're thinking about is, so part of the 65,000 will be retiring because of age, right? Are there ways to keep them in the workforce, or are there ways to engage them and empower them to do different things? So they are our best sales advocates, right? If we really want to attract people who have some connection to Maine, I mean, nobody wants to say no to their grandparents. So if we can arm grandparents with good tools to talk to their families about good economic opportunities in Maine or starting their business in Maine, I think that's one really good thing. The other thing is, I think people are working longer and thinking about kind of creative solutions. So, you know, they might not want to work 5 days a week, but do they want to work 2 days a week or 3 days a week? And is there a place there to maybe do a better job engaging that, and to use seniors as they decide to retire in mentoring relationships with these younger students as we're bringing them through that maybe don't have professional role models but would like one. And I think it would give kind of a really good opportunity for us, because the value of being the oldest state in the country is we have a ton of experience. And if we can share that experience and leverage those strengths, we need to. So the Department of Labor and Department of Corrections right now are working on a very specific plan for, they're executing some training in the corrections facilities to create those pathways, and then they are actually doing, we were at a jail recently doing mock interviews so that people were ready for job interviews and to think about what do they want to do and where are those jobs and how do they find those jobs. And so that work's all happening now pre-release, which is really helpful, because as they're released, they actually are going to a situation, right, where they have a job potentially, that can pay for housing and the other things, which is creating more solidity in the marketplace. I think timing-wise, that's working out really well right now. Employers are at a place where they're a little bit more flexible about the workforce and making different accommodations. And so I think there's room for some of that now, for sure. Yeah.
So how do we roll this out? Like, what are there resources? Like, how do we bring this to our local community? How do we bring this? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. How do we roll this out to local communities and things that we can easily affect?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question, John. So what we're doing right now is there will be a work team for each of these work streams. So there are 7 work streams. There will be kind of a team working on those, and those will all be pushed out into the market. And so local communities can just plug into those work teams and say, you know what, we care a lot about childcare in Waterville, so we want to be part of that stream. Okay, great. Here are the people. Here's how you would plug in there. There will be really clear kind of project structures and dashboards up and available so that you can see the primary work, but also, you know, if there are specific things you want to do, we can change that too. But implementation is the biggest thing, right? You can write a plan and you know, it was hard work for sure, and a lot of people engaged and were incredibly helpful, and I'm proud of that work, but that's just a milestone, right? Now is where the rest of the work starts, right? Carrying that momentum from development, which people were pretty excited because this hadn't been done for a while, so we had a lot of momentum and that was great. Now we've got to carry that through to implementing, and that's sometimes a little bit of the heavier lift, so we're trying to create a real clear structure there. We've assigned a person to just project manage this work, which means all they'll be doing is chasing down these programs. So I think I'm getting the hook. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.